How's it going, YouTube? Tyler the Hotshot Hauler here, guys. Bringing a video to you all about probably the most controversial topic in all of trucking, and that is cheap freight. So before we talk about my opinions of cheap freight, let's talk about what it is. Cheap freight is basically a topic with a lot of variables, and everybody has a different opinion of what cheap freight is. Some people on one side of the spectrum think that anything less than $2 a mile is cheap freight, and on the other end of the spectrum, people think that they made all kinds of money if they moved a load for $1 a mile. So you kind of have two very opposite sides of the spectrum, just like everything in life. Let's talk about some misconceptions with cheap freight. There is too many people out there that believe that if you take cheap freight, that you're screwing the whole trucking industry and that you are the problem. Well, guys, I hate to bring the harsh reality to you, but the reality is it boils down to one thing, or two things, I guess. Money and how much they want to pay to get something moved, okay? The reality is if a place doesn't have money, they probably don't have a lot of money to pay for freight. So they have a very low budget to move something. So they have accepted the fact that they're going to probably have to wait days or not, if not weeks, to get something moved. On the flip side, if places have lots of money, they will be able to move stuff very quickly if they so choose that they want to pay a lot of money for that freight. Perfect example is loads that sit on the load board that are for $2, $3 a mile, if not more, are gone almost instantly. Okay, like instantly. Like you make the phone call, load's already gone. Okay, whereas loads that are paying 50 cents a mile usually sit there for days. It's just the reality of the situation, guys. It boils down to if people have money and if people want to pay for freight. That is all it boils down to. And by you taking freight to benefit yourself, if you so dictate that will benefit you, how does that affect the industry at all? Somebody's going to move that freight. People will say, oh, well, because then the brokers know that they can pay less money for freight. Most brokers out there are incredibly greedy. And we don't have transparency, so we don't know how much money that they're making. We don't even know how much that they charge the customer for the load. Will we ever know these things? Probably not. Let's talk about what I define as cheap freight and if I take cheap freight and all that type of stuff. I define cheap freight as my anything that doesn't cover my cost per mile. My cost per mile ranges anywhere from about $1.10 a mile to $1.25 a mile. So just to make it simple, I call it $1.30 a mile is my minimum, and that's, if you watch my videos, you know that if I don't get back to the door over $1.30 a mile, I didn't make any money. I covered direct expenses and planned expenses. Okay, that's what works for me, and I try to keep this whole topic as simple as possible because there's nothing but variables. So let's talk about the variables. Okay, so for example, would I consider cheap freight a 500-pound pallet with no tarp for $1 a mile? Absolutely not. That's a fantastic load for that cargo. Okay, on the flip side, would I consider a 10,000-pound skid steer a good load at $1 a mile? Absolutely not, because it has eaten up all my ability to get any other freight on my trailer. If I get a load that is going to eat up my trailer capacity, I am not going to take that, probably for less than $1.50 a mile. Now, on the flip side, if I already have a load on board, let's say I have a skid steer that weighs 8,000 pounds, okay? And let's say that there's a load that pops up for a pallet that weighs 500 pounds, okay? I'm definitely going to throw that on the trailer if I can, as long as it's not going to add an unnecessary amount of time or headache, or it's not a wind sail. I'm going to throw it on the trailer, because why wouldn't you? That's more money as long as it's going on the way that you're going. That usually doesn't happen very often. When I got into this business, I had this mindset of, oh yeah, I'm going to be driving around with a full trailer all the time. Not true, and very rare does it happen like last week when I was able to fill my trailer, okay? Here's the reality of what usually happens. The reality is, when it comes to freight, you have to leave your house with a good load, and usually I don't leave my house with a load paying less than about $1.90 a mile at the very minimum. Don't leave your house with cheap freight, okay? Get a good load to leave your house. Take the time, hang out at your house, do what you got to do, get a good load to leave home, okay? Then on your way back for back hauls, I will take cheap freight any day of the week to try to get home. As long as, like I said, it meets my stipulations of size, weight, and all that type of stuff. But more importantly, guys, it has to meet my requirements for my time and what I feel is necessary. And this changes. So, for example, if you see a load on the load board that is going to cost you to be away from the house for an extra day, or if you have to deadhead 2 hours to go get it, or if it's going to make it so between your deadhead to pick up and your drop and then your deadhead after drop, it's going to cost you all kinds of extra miles and, more importantly, time, you have to calculate if it is worth your time, okay? And that is just something that you have to figure out, and sometimes you calculate it correctly and sometimes you don't. But the reality is, guys, if freight is going to cost me more time away from home, I'm not going to pick it up. Unless if it's a good load, I will definitely take the extra day away from home and the extra expenses for that. But a load that's paying 70 cents a mile for me to have extra mileage, extra time, and be away from home extra is not worth my time. And for me, guys, if any of you who watch the channel here regularly, you know I don't run the road hard like most hotshotters. For me, what I consider hard, and you can go ahead and laugh, being away a full week of work. So basically being away from home for 4 nights. That is a full week of work for me. And working up until my reset time and getting home before my reset time, that's a full week for me. Okay? I hate resetting on the road. I've done it a couple times and I hate it. So for me, my stipulation is I will be home before my reset unless if I have loads that justify me being able to be away from home for extra long. I don't run the road for weeks on end and follow freight like most hotshotters. I run narrow lanes, which makes it even harder to get freight. And I just accept the reality that sometimes the stars are going to align where you're going to make money and sometimes they're not. And I would rather drive home empty and be with my family and do that part of my life than to be out here fighting for freight. Because let me tell you guys, loads that are good are on the board for nothing. And guys will sit at truck stops. I've seen it, and I think it is just asinine. They sit at truck stops for days, and they sit there with their phone, and they sit there on their laptop, and they just keep refreshing. They keep doing this for days, just waiting for that one thing to pop up, and then they call, and then they get the load or they don't get the load. And imagine sitting there for days doing this or waiting for something to pop up. Guys, I have done that at my house, and let me tell you, and I've done that at a hotel before during a reset trying to get a load. I do not wait for freight, and that's a whole different video I'm going to be making a video on. And I have just accepted if the freight is there, I'll grab it. If it's not, I'm going to drive home empty and I'm going to be with my family. And that's what works for me. And that is my outlook on cheap freight, guys. The reality is, it boils down to this. If you can afford to pick up the freight, whatever you determine is cheap freight, and it's not going to cost you what you determine as an unnecessary amount of time or insurance risk or extra expenses, like if it's a wind sale, it's going to increase your fuel cost and your DEF cost because you're going to burn more fuel, okay? You have to make those calculations if that cheap freight is what you consider cheap or not, okay? That is the only way to look at it. But at the end of the day, guys, you have to realize trucking is a cutthroat industry. And if you don't take that load, somebody else eventually is going to grab that load. I don't care how bad it's paying. Eventually, somebody will grab that load. And you have to remember, guys, just because a load is posted for 50 cents a mile, I've always been able to negotiate a load up to no less than 75 cents a mile. I don't think I've ever loaded anything on my trailer for less than 75 cents a mile that I can recall. So always, guys, negotiate rates. And something to stay away from, guys, a lot of the times cheap freight has brokerages that are sketchy, and most of the time when you call them, they don't speak English. My advice, hang up the phone and don't even play that game, because you are going to potentially get yourself in a situation where you might be moving somebody's freight for free, and you are going to feel a whole lot worse than you are with just accepting an empty trailer and driving to the front door. So But anyways, guys, that's going to sum this video up on cheap freight. I know it's a sore subject, but the reality is, guys, cheap freight is always going to be there. It boils down to two things, like I said, money and people willing to want to spend that money to move freight. And how bad they want that freight. That is just the reality of it, okay? And at the end of the day, you have to keep your head above water. So you have to calculate, is it worth it for your time to move the cheap freight? Because if you don't move it, somebody else is. And that is just the reality of the situation, guys. So if you enjoyed this video, guys, please shoot me a like and a subscribe. If you have any comments or questions, please don't hesitate to ask. And as always, guys, stay tuned for more Hot Shot content. Thank you.